in the deserts of North Africa, one man rose from a poor Bedouin tribe to become one of the most feared leaders of the 20th century. His name was Muammar Gaddafi. For more than 4 decades, he ruled Libya with complete control. But beneath the speeches, uniforms, and promises of revolution, there was a much darker side, one that was hidden from cameras and covered by silence. Muammar Mohammed Abu Minyar Gaddafi was born in June 1942 in the desert region of Qasr Abu Khadi, near the coastal town of Sirte, in Italian-controlled Libya. His exact birth date was never officially recorded, but most sources agree it was around June 7th. He came from a Bedouin Arab family belonging to the Kadhadfa tribe, a modest and largely uneducated nomadic group. His father, Muhammad Abdul Salam, was a camel herder who worked seasonal jobs to support the family. Their home was a traditional goat hair tent with no electricity, no running water, and very little contact with the outside world. Despite his poor background, Gaddafi was exposed to political ideas early. In 1951, Libya gained independence under King Idris I, becoming the United Kingdom of Libya. But many Libyans, especially in the rural areas, felt left behind. Corruption, inequality, and the presence of foreign military bases, especially British forces in Tobruk, and American troops at Wheelus Air Base near Tripoli, caused resentment. Gaddafi closely followed regional politics and was deeply influenced by the rise of Arab nationalism. As a teenager, he idolized Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser, who was known for his strong anti-colonial stance. Gaddafi carried a picture of Nasser in his school books and even memorized many of his speeches. He first enrolled at secondary school in Sabha, where he organized student protests in 1956 against the Suez Crisis, after the British, French, and Israeli invasion of Egypt. In 1961, at age 19, Gaddafi was accepted into the Royal Military Academy in Benghazi, which was partially overseen by British military instructors. There, he quickly formed a secret cell of young army officers who shared his growing anger at the monarchy and its ties to the Western powers. This group would later be known as the Free Officers Movement, inspired by the group Nasser had led in Egypt in 1952. Gaddafi's military training included a short posting in the United Kingdom in 1966, where he studied military communications. During his time in Britain, he reportedly stayed at the army base in Beaconsfield, and later visited London. But his experiences only hardened his anti-Western views. He felt alienated by the culture, and saw it as morally bankrupt. By the late 1960s, King Idris was aging and often absent, spending most of his time in Turkey and Greece for health reasons. The country was deeply divided, with rising unemployment, social unrest, and anger over the monarchy's close relationship with Western oil companies and governments. Idris had no strong successor, and the army was becoming increasingly politicized. On the night of August 31, 1969, while King Idris was receiving medical treatment in Turkey and scheduled to fly to Greece, Gaddafi and his group of 70 to 100 officers launched their coup. They took over key military and government installations in Benghazi and Tripoli, without much resistance. By the morning of September 1st, they had full control of the country. The monarchy was abolished, and Libya was declared a republic, the Libyan Arab Republic. Idris's heir, Crown Prince Hassan as-Senussi, who was acting king at the time, was arrested. Gaddafi appeared on the radio to announce the revolution and claimed the move was to free Libya from corruption, imperialism, and tyranny. At only 27 years old, Gaddafi became the youngest leader in the Arab world. He appointed himself chairman of the Revolutionary Command Council, the new ruling body of Libya. He wore no military rank at the time and refused to call himself president, instead choosing the title brotherly leader and guide of the revolution. By 1970, all existing political parties were banned under new laws. Many former officials from the monarchy were arrested or forced into exile. Political activity outside the Revolutionary Command Council was labeled as treason. In 1973, Gaddafi announced what he called a cultural revolution. It allowed ordinary citizens to set up people's committees to monitor loyalty in schools, universities, and workplaces. These committees, however, were mostly controlled by loyalists and acted as tools to root out anyone suspected of being critical of the regime. That same year, Gaddafi outlined his Third International Theory. He said it was a new alternative to capitalism and communism. It was based on direct rule by the people through local councils, mixed with Islamic principles. In 1975, he published these ideas in the Green Book, a three-part manifesto that rejected political parties, called for the abolition of traditional parliaments, and redefined property ownership. It was printed in millions of copies and distributed across Libya and parts of Africa and the Middle East. Schools were required to memorize parts of it, and criticism of the book was considered a punishable offense. Gaddafi used Libya's growing oil wealth to invest in infrastructure. Between 1970 and 1979, oil revenues increased rapidly, reaching over $10 billion annually by the end of the decade. Roads, hospitals, and schools were built, and some subsidies were provided to the poor. However, most of the wealth remained concentrated in the hands of the regime and its loyalists. At the same time, Gaddafi expanded his internal security forces. The most feared was the Internal Security Agency, led by loyal commanders who reported directly to him. Surveillance increased dramatically. Suspected dissidents were taken to prisons like Abu Salim or Al-Jadeda, often without trial. Torture methods included beatings, electrocution, and stress positions. Public executions were held in stadiums and broadcast live. In 1976, a group of university students was hanged in Tripoli after a failed protest. In 1977, Gaddafi renamed Libya the Great Socialist People's Libyan Arab Jamahiriya. He claimed that power was now in the hands of the people, through basic people's congresses and local committees. But in practice, these institutions were symbolic. All real decisions came from Gaddafi and a small circle of loyal military officers. The press was completely nationalized. Only state-run newspapers and radio stations were allowed. Foreign media was heavily censored. Judges were replaced by revolutionary committees, and legal cases were often decided based on ideology rather than law. By the 1980s, Gaddafi had turned Libya into a surveillance state, where fear controlled every part of society. In 1980, he launched what was known as the Stray Dogs Policy. This campaign specifically targeted Libyans living abroad who criticized his regime. Operatives from Libya's external security organization, led by Musa Kusa at the time, tracked and assassinated dissidents in exile. Between 1980 and 1987, at least 25 exiles were confirmed killed across Europe, with operations carried out in cities like London, Rome, Bonn, Athens, and Milan. Some were shot in their apartments. Others were stabbed or poisoned. In the UK, the Libyan embassy in London became notorious for spying on Libyan students and journalists. Inside the country, public executions became a tool of terror. On April 7, 1984, 5 university students were publicly hanged at the University of Tripoli. The event was broadcast live on national TV. These executions marked the anniversary of student uprisings and were used to send a message. School children and college students were often forced to attend, clap, and chant in support of the regime. Some were even made to participate in the events by holding ropes or reading statements. In the same year, 1984, a major international incident occurred when shots were fired from the Libyan embassy in London during a protest. Police officer Yvonne Fletcher was killed. The event led to the severing of diplomatic ties between Libya and the UK. Investigations later revealed that the gunman had connections to Gaddafi's security forces. Meanwhile, Gaddafi had begun expanding the notorious Abu Salim prison in Tripoli. Already known as a detention center for political prisoners, it was turned into a high-security facility by 1980. Conditions inside were brutal. Cells were overcrowded, food was scarce, and medical care was almost non-existent. Inmates were denied any contact with family. Prisoners were tortured with electric shock devices, waterboarding, and stress positions. One common method involved suspending prisoners by the arms behind their backs, causing intense pain and long-term nerve damage. Many prisoners died during interrogation and were buried in unmarked graves near the prison walls. During this same period, Gaddafi increased support for military groups overseas. He funded the Irish Republican Army with large arms shipments, including the delivery of over 100 tons of weapons in 1986. He also backed the Moro, Islamic Liberation Front in the Philippines, and various Palestinian factions, including the Abu Nidal organization, known for carrying out brutal attacks. Libyan support extended to rebel groups in Chad, Sudan, and Central Africa, destabilizing entire regions. In April 1986, Libyan agents were linked to a bombing at La Belle nightclub in West Berlin. The explosion killed 3 people, including 2 American servicemen, and injured over 200. The U.S. responded with Operation El Dorado Canyon on April 15, 1986. American warplanes bombed key targets in Tripoli and Benghazi. Gaddafi survived the strike, but dozens of people were killed, including his adopted daughter, Hana Gaddafi, who was around 4 years old at the time. In the aftermath, Gaddafi used the attack to justify even tighter control inside Libya. On June 29, 1996, one of the most horrific crimes of Gaddafi's rule unfolded inside the high walls of Abu Salim prison. Around 1,270 inmates, most of them political prisoners, had been demanding better living conditions. The protests had started peacefully, but the guards quickly locked down the facility. Abdullah Sanusi was placed in charge of the response. After a short round of fake negotiations, the guards and security forces suddenly opened fire. Prisoners were ordered into courtyards in small groups under the pretense of being moved to other sections. Once grouped together, they were gunned down with automatic rifles and machine guns. The massacre continued for several hours. Injured prisoners were either left to bleed to death or executed where they lay. Others were shot while hiding under staircases or inside cells. Once the killing stopped, bulldozers were brought in to bury the bodies in mass graves behind the prison walls. Some corpses were reportedly burned or thrown into refrigerated trucks that later disappeared. For years, the Libyan government denied that anything had happened. Families of the victims were told nothing. Mothers and fathers visited the prison for months, only to be turned away with no explanation. Some were given false documents claiming their relatives had died from illness or accidents. Others were forced to sign waivers in exchange for death certificates, with no bodies ever returned to them. The massacre was kept secret until 2001, when a former prison guard leaked information to human rights organizations. Later in 2004, Gaddafi's former justice minister, Mustafa Abdel Jalil, publicly confirmed the massacre had occurred. Gaddafi often appeared in public as a supporter of women's rights. He passed laws against forced marriage and encouraged female education. He even created the Revolutionary Nuns, an elite group of female bodyguards known as the Amazonian Guard. These women were trained in martial arts and carried weapons, but their presence also served as a distraction from what was happening behind the scenes. At the same time, a network operated under Gaddafi's direct command that targeted girls and young women for his personal use. This system involved school principals, bodyguards, doctors, and senior aides. One of the main centers for this abuse was Gaddafi's main compound in Tripoli, Bab al-Azizia, which included underground bunkers, private apartments, and locked rooms with no windows. Other locations included luxury villas in Sirte and sabha, and special guest houses disguised as state buildings. Teenage girls were taken directly from classrooms, sometimes during school hours, under the excuse of serving the revolution. Families were too afraid to resist. Victims ranged from age 14 to their early 20s. Many came from poor or rural backgrounds. Some were taken from wedding celebrations, beauty contests, and even state-sponsored events. Upon arrival, girls were often given alcohol or pills. If they resisted, they were beaten or isolated until they complied. Some were kept for days, others for months or even years. A few were passed around to senior officials. Gaddafi referred to some of them as his girls and claimed they owed him loyalty. Several testimonies from survivors after 2011 revealed the existence of hidden cameras, chains, and locked rooms. Victims were watched at all times. Many developed long-term physical injuries and mental trauma. Some were forced to undergo abortions in secret clinics. In cases where pregnancies occurred, the children were taken away or never seen again. Boys were not spared either. In several cases, teenage males were abducted from state-run orphanages and training camps. Some were sexually abused and later used for blackmail or threats against families. All of this was protected by absolute silence. Doctors who treated victims were required to sign secrecy contracts. Anyone who spoke risked prison or death. In some known cases, girls who tried to speak out were later found dead under suspicious circumstances. Police reports were blocked from reaching the court, and official records were erased. None of this was ever mentioned in Libyan media. Government newspapers only printed praise for Gaddafi, and TV channels portrayed him as a father figure to the nation. As the 2000s began, Gaddafi tried to reshape Libya's image. He ended his nuclear weapons program in 2003 and paid $2.7 billion in compensation to families of the 1988 Lockerbie bombing. These moves helped him restore relations with Europe and the United States. Foreign leaders began visiting Libya again, and oil deals resumed. But while the world was watching the diplomatic front, horrifying abuses continued inside Libya. Behind closed doors, new types of cruelty were being used in Libya's prison system. In facilities like Abu Salim, Ain Zarqa, and others, experiments were carried out on inmates without consent. These included the injection of untested drugs, chemical exposure, and experimental surgeries. One prison doctor, arrested after Gaddafi's fall, admitted to giving prisoners substances designed to weaken their muscles or cause extreme psychological breakdowns. In some cases, prisoners were used to test poisons and nerve agents. Torture remained widespread. Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch reported several techniques used by Libyan security forces, including hanging by wrists for days, sleep deprivation, waterboarding, beatings with electric wires, and simulated drownings. Inmates were often kept in isolation cells without light or sound for weeks. Prisoners were denied lawyers, and courts rarely held trials. Some detainees spent over a decade without being officially charged. In 2005, student-led demonstrations in Benghazi broke out after years of growing frustration. These protests were not large, but were seen as dangerous by the regime. Security forces opened fire, killing at least 13 young people. Many of those arrested were later tortured or disappeared. After this, the regime increased surveillance in universities. Every school had a revolutionary committee to report any political talk. Teachers and students were both watched. Even young children became part of this control system. Some were taken from schools and questioned about their parents. Others were sent to youth camps where they were taught to report disloyalty and memorize parts of the Green Book. In rural areas, families that refused to take part in Gaddafi's social programs were denied food rations or housing support. During this decade, international human rights groups were only allowed into Libya on tightly controlled visits. They were never taken to the worst prisons, and local witnesses were warned in advance not to speak. This allowed the system of abuse to continue, while Gaddafi gained political credit abroad. By 2011, after more than 4 decades of tight control, the Libyan people had reached a breaking point. The Arab Spring had already removed leaders in Tunisia and Egypt. On February 15th, inspired by these uprisings, Libyans began protesting in Benghazi after the arrest of human rights lawyer Fatih Terbil, who represented families of the Abu Salim massacre victims. The protests spread quickly to other cities like Beida, Misrata, and Zawiya. In response, Gaddafi launched a violent crackdown. Police opened fire on peaceful demonstrators. Army units used live ammunition. On February 17th, now known as the Day of Rage, dozens were killed in Benghazi alone. Snipers were stationed on buildings to shoot into crowds. In Misrata, civilians were shelled with mortars and artillery. Helicopters and fighter jets were deployed to bomb neighborhoods. Security forces raided homes and arrested suspected organizers. In some cases, families were executed in their own houses. Hospitals became overwhelmed, but many were blocked by armed checkpoints. Paramedics were arrested. Some wounded protesters bled to death because ambulances weren't allowed to reach them. Over 1,000 people were killed in the first 3 weeks. Phone lines, internet access, and media broadcasts were cut in key areas. Foreign journalists were arrested or expelled. International aid workers were blocked from entering conflict zones. Gaddafi made several speeches during this time, calling the protesters traitors and drug users. He ordered security forces to go door to door to cleanse cities. Entire districts in Zawiya and Misrata were leveled with tanks and airstrikes. Mass graves were later discovered outside these cities. On March 17th, the United Nations Security Council passed Resolution 1973, which authorized all necessary measures to protect civilians, including a no-fly zone. On March 19th, NATO launched airstrikes targeting Gaddafi's military infrastructure. But Gaddafi still refused to give up power. As the fighting continued into the summer, Libya became a battlefield between regime forces and rebel militias. Thousands more died. The infrastructure collapsed. Entire families fled their homes. It became clear that Gaddafi was willing to destroy the entire country to stay in control. By mid-August 2011, the capital city of Tripoli fell to rebel forces after weeks of fighting. Gaddafi's loyalists either surrendered or fled. His main compound, Bab al-Azizia, was stormed on August 23rd, and rebels found luxury homes, secret rooms, and boxes of documents, but no sign of Gaddafi himself. Gaddafi had already vanished from public view. His last confirmed appearance was a phone call broadcast over state television, where he urged his supporters to keep fighting. After that, his movements became a mystery. Intelligence reports later showed he fled Tripoli in a small convoy and moved east towards Sirte, his hometown. In Sirte, Gaddafi took shelter in a network of safe houses and underground bunkers. He was guarded by a shrinking group of trusted fighters, many from his tribe, the Kadhadfa. Supplies were low, and NATO aircraft patrolled overhead daily. Rebel forces from Misrata and Benghazi surrounded the city and launched attacks to capture him. On October 20th, 2011, a convoy of about 50 vehicles tried to break out of Sirte. NATO surveillance drones spotted the group and relayed the position to French jets, which bombed the convoy on the outskirts of the city. Several vehicles were destroyed. Gaddafi survived the airstrike and escaped on foot with a few guards, hiding in a drainage pipe beneath the road. Rebel fighters from Misrata found him shortly after. Armed and injured, Gaddafi was pulled out of the tunnel, disoriented and bleeding. He was beaten by the crowd and loaded into a pickup truck. Videos filmed by rebels showed him alive, but in pain. What happens next remains debated, but within hours, Gaddafi was dead from gunshot wounds. His son Mutassim, who had also been hiding with him, was captured and killed the same day. Gaddafi's body was taken to Misrata and placed in a refrigerated meat locker, where it was displayed for the public. Thousands of Libyans lined up to see the man who had ruled their lives for 42 years. After 4 days, he was buried in an unmarked grave somewhere in the desert, to prevent it from becoming a shrine or target. In the months after his death, the full scale of his regime's crimes began to surface. Inside Bab al-Azizia and other government buildings, investigators found rooms built for detention and torture, some hidden behind steel doors or even beneath the floor. There were cells with bloodstains, restraints on walls, and shelves filled with surveillance recordings. Tunnels beneath the compound stretched for miles, connecting bunkers, escape routes, and hidden armories. Some chambers were found with personal belongings believed to have belonged to abducted women. A few underground rooms had surgical beds and medical equipment, hinting at the abuse described by former victims. Government offices were filled with files. Handwritten orders, secret correspondence, and intelligence reports revealed how far Gaddafi's control had reached. Lists of dissidents, budgets for foreign operations, and coded records of assassinations were found. One file detailed a 1980s operation in which agents were sent to London to kill exiles. Others included transcripts of phone taps and reports from informants placed in universities, mosques, and embassies. Mass graves were discovered in multiple locations, especially near prisons like Abu Salim, and in areas around Tripoli and Benghazi. One site in eastern Libya held more than 200 bodies, many of them still unidentified. Forensic teams began trying to match remains with missing persons reports, but progress was slow due to lack of resources and ongoing violence. Former regime figures tried to escape justice. Some fled to Algeria, Niger, and Egypt. Others hid in rural Libya, protected by tribal networks. Abdullah Senussi, who was long considered one of the most feared men in Libya, was arrested in Mauritania in March 2012 while traveling under a false name. He was later extradited to Libya and charged with crimes against humanity, including his role in the 1996 Abu Salim massacre and the violent suppression of protests in 2011. Despite these arrests, Libya quickly fell into chaos. With no strong government in place, local militias took control of different cities. Some fought each other for power. Others pursued personal revenge. Elections were held in 2012, but unity proved impossible. The country split between rival parliaments and armed groups. Gaddafi's weapon stockpiles, filled with assault rifles, missiles, and explosives, were looted and smuggled out. Many ended up in the hands of terrorist groups across North and West Africa. Attacks increased in Mali, Nigeria, and parts of the Sahel region, fueled by weapons that had once been stored in Libyan bunkers. By 2014, Libya had entered full civil war. Gaddafi's legacy left the country unable to recover. Many victims are still waiting for justice. Some bodies have never been found. Some crimes were never fully investigated. Gaddafi once claimed to be a man of the people, but the truth is hard to stomach.